Well, welcome. We've really had a beautiful day together. This is our second day, and it's just so full of Dharma in this Dharma hall. And what better way to illuminate the teachings than through a living master, a guiding elder, someone who lives in the Dhamma. So we're very blessed to have the end of the evening to tie it together, these very important theme, the most important theme of wisdom and compassion, and to bring it alive in our daily existence, to embody it and to get closer to it, to touch it, to realize it. And so I feel very fortunate that we can hear from a guiding elder. Just briefly, for those of you who do not know our keynote speaker, Venerable Ajahn Pasanno, I would like to first start with some very special news that he's just been recently given the title by the King of Thailand, which is a great honor, as Pra-Raj Bodhi-Vides, and so this was just recently given to him, and many congratulations for this award for your all of the great Dharma activities that I will be sharing with you. Just in brief, Venerable Ajahn Pasanno took ordination in Thailand in 1974. With Venerable Prakru Nana Sri Vatana as his preceptor. During his first year as a monk, he was taken by his teacher to meet Ajahn Chah, with whom he asked to be allowed to stay and train. One of the early residents of Wat Pa Nanachat, Ajahn Pasanno became its abbot in its 9th year. And during his incumbency, Wat Pa Nanachat developed considerably, both in physical size and reputation. He spent 24 years living in Thailand, and Ajahn Pasanno became a well-known and highly respected monk and Dharma teacher. He moved to California on New Year's Eve of 1997 to share the abbotship of Abhigiri with Ajahn Amaro. And in 2010, Ajahn Amaro accepted an invitation to serve as the abbot of Amaravati Buddhist monastery in England, giving Ajahn Pasanno to serve as the sole abbot of Abhigiri for the next 8 years. And in the spring of 2018, Venerable Ajahn Pasanno stepped back from his role of abbot, leaving the monastery for a year-long retreat overseas. And so now he's just recently returned and is the guiding elder at Abhigiri Monastery. And I feel a kind of special connection with this community because our work in Bodh Gaya, I was recently, just by auspicious circumstances this year, a few of your monks will be coming to be the Dharma speakers, including Ajahn Amaro, who will be our keynote speaker under the Bodhi tree, Ajahn Kewali, and a few others. So I feel very blessed, and Richard and I first met the Theravada through Venerable Ajahn Sumedho in England, and that was our first introduction to the Theravada tradition. So I feel like there's some connection, and very blessed that you're here tonight to guide us in deepening our understanding of wisdom and compassion.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. So welcome everybody, and I ask permission from the elders, the Sangha members, and lay community to speak on Dhamma this evening. The theme, something around wisdom and compassion, so we'll see what comes out. One of the things that came to mind in when Wang Mo let me know what the topic would be was recollecting that, like from the say in the Mahayana and Vajrayana, then there's a lot of this tremendous emphasis on wisdom and compassion, and that they they're a pair that have to work together. And in the Theravada, it's interesting that there is another element to it with this aspect of wisdom, compassion, that also an element of purity. And so that when I do the recitation, like Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa, which is paying homage to the Buddha, it is recollecting these qualities. Namo Tassa, of course, is giving homage. Bhagavato is normally translated as like the Blessed One, or one who gives blessing, or is a blessed being. And this is the element of compassion. Bhagavato Arahato is pointing to the element of purity. And Arahato is when we do our chanting, it's translated as noble, like homage to the blessed, noble, perfectly enlightened one, and we translate it as noble. The translation, when it's translated into Thai, to me is very interesting, because it says one who is far from defilement, and that's an interesting aspect, in the sense of, because so often what we think in terms of, say, like purity, especially like in the English language, then and Judeo-Christian philosophy, or the way that our worldview, things are pretty black and white, and there is a tendency to conceive of things in very absolute terms, and that's never really been the case in terms of, say, from the approach from a Buddhist perspective. Because once you start dealing in absolutes, then you're kind of stuck, or you're sunk. So that sense of, I say, like absolute purity. Well, what is that? How does that manifest? And so that that sense of being far from defilement is a little different way of relating to it. There's like where the mind sees things clearly, and there's still there are the conditioning factors of mind, but it's seen clearly, so it doesn't doesn't really land. It doesn't really, in a sense, like there's those series of discourses where the Buddha is, where Mara comes to tempt the Buddha, and you think, well, because there's different aspects of Mara, both as Deva Buddha Mara, as a physical being, also Kilesa Mara, the internal qualities. And say, well, and the Buddha's response is, I see you, Mara. And then that's the end. I mean, Mara's powerless. So this sense of purity is not, it isn't as if there's this constant, absolute, but there is the heart that is not affected by whatever conditioning. Because as soon as you have a body and a mind, you got a problem. Whether you're enlightened or you're not enlightened. And so that is to be able to see that clearly. And of course then that is this aspect of wisdom is then how do we take that knowledge and apply it? Or how do we live it? And of course then that's when it ties into compassion. So that these are interrelated qualities that tend to support each other and balance each other. And again, that when we think of the quality of wisdom, because the Buddha manifests these qualities, but they're not, exclusive to the Buddha. I mean, the Buddha didn't keep everything for himself, and we were sort of out of luck. Everything that he experienced was he gave everything for people to continue to practice and experience the same qualities that allowed him to be free. So I think it's quite important to see these qualities of wisdom, of purity, of compassion, working together and balancing each other. And that, and again, not making it absolute and other in the sense of, that's just what the Buddha does, and the rest of us are too bad. These are qualities which are accessible to all of us. So that's I think it's a really essential aspect of the Buddha's teachings, and when we think of whatever the Buddha taught, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for how we live in the world? So being able to draw that in, to internalize it in the ways of one of the qualities that we recollect on a regular basis, and qualities of the Dhamma is open haiko. It's leading inwards. We have to draw it into the heart and into our own experience, so that we're able to manifest that ourselves also. So these aspects of wisdom, compassion, and purity are they're kind of like guideposts or reminders of what's helpful for us as we go about our daily life, how we interact with the world around us, how we relate to our own meditation and cultivation. That these are qualities we want to be lifting up, relying on, drawing into the heart. Now these are and there isn't anything that is beyond us. So as we reflect on these aspects of it's like compassion, and what does compassion mean in terms of a quality of being, a quality of heart, I could say. Traditionally, it's that response to suffering. That when there is suffering, there is a wish to alleviate suffering, and that is an aspect of it's what's called a divine abiding, but it's also a way that we need to pay attention to the experience of suffering, because that's what the Buddha said over and over and over again throughout his teaching career. Is I teach only two things: suffering and the end of suffering, and to be recognizing that relating from compassion to the manifestation of suffering, both in our own hearts and primarily and beginning, because we have to learn how to, what is this experience of dukkha, and a sense of dis-ease, discontent, stress, that we all experience, and then how to respond to that. Because I think one of the things that compassion really helps to do is helps us to not get locked into the tendency that we have to idealize or to conceptualize or to rationalize the teachings and the practice too much. It's easy for our minds to set our quite noble goals as Buddhist practitioners, to set them external to ourselves or set that up, elevate it on something that is idealized and conceptualized, as opposed to what does it feel like? What's the experience? And when we do that, of course, there's a separation. And if we're separated, then we're still going to keep suffering. So that being able to bring that back in and say, how do I work with suffering? And in that sense of that tendency of the mind to be ill at ease, uncomfortable, sort of unfulfilled in some way, and thinking that there's something else out there that's going to fix it, it's going to make it better. Like there's a Western monk who lived with Ajahn Chah, and he noticed that Ajahn Chah would, oftentimes treat the Thai monks and the Western monks a little bit differently, in that he could be a bit more maybe critical or or a bit more fierce with the Thais than he would with the Westerners, and so then the monk asked Ajahn Chah, because it was sort of like, well, like somehow we're missing out on this, the way that Ajahn Chah treats these monks, and then we're not getting the same treatment, so we must be missing out. We must be not getting the kind of the full training. And so then he asked Ajahn Chah, I noticed that this is the case, and it'd be good if you treated us the same way as you do. And Ajahn Chah, his reply was, you guys criticize yourselves enough. I don't need to do it. So I think that's a really compassionate way to really seeing different situations. He wasn't taking a template and just emulating a template and making it all very rational and consistent. It was out of compassion. He was seeing say a habit that we didn't need to repeat. So anyway, that's the sense of how these compassion and purity and wisdom, these they do fit together. They work together. They balance each other in different ways, and I think particularly with compassion, another example of Ajahn Chah that comes to mind is Ajahn Sumedho, when he first met Ajahn Chah, because he met a Thai monk who invited him to come down and told him about Ajahn Chah, invited him to come down. And that monk he'd had some education. He was from a very well-off family, and had also been in the Navy. He'd been in the Thai Navy, and Ajahn Sumedho had been in the American Navy. So they shared some history, and then this monk in particular was quite strict, and was really keen on Ajahn Chah as a really strict monk. So he took Ajahn Sumedho back to meet Ajahn Chah, and then Ajahn Sumedho ended up staying on with Ajahn Chah, training with him. And then after some time, I'm not sure how long, a couple years, 2-3 years, I'm not sure how long. Anyway, the Thai monk ended up disrobing and leaving the training. And not only did he disrobe, but he became an alcoholic, he was a drug user, and was leading a very unskillful life, and would show up from time to time, and Ajahn Sumedho would get really upset and complain to Ajahn Chah, how could this happen? How there was this monk who was, he encouraged me, he spoke so highly of you, how could he do this? And Ajahn Chah said, well, I mean, well, anything can happen. But he said, whenever he comes around, don't criticize him, don't display your disappointment. Always address him as Ajahn, because he was your Ajahn who led you here, and you have a debt of gratitude to him, and to not be critical, not be angry, because it's not useful, it's not beneficial. He said, but if you address him in a skillful way, maybe it'll be a cause for him to remember the good things that he's done, and so it's a tremendous compassion, and whenever Ajahn Sumedho did see this, Somai was his name, then you could always see him brighten, and he ended up not leading a skillful life at all, but he did have these reminders of something good that he did do, and it's important. And so that again is sort of sometimes if you've got just purity and wisdom, then you can get pretty judgmental and kind of dismissive, because wisdom, you can figure out exactly how everything should be, how you should be, the world should be, and then you got kind of this purity backing it up. So then there's not the compassion there too. So it always needs compassion to temper things. But the wisdom and purity are essential. But it's that tempering of it. And similarly with, it's just like with all these qualities need to be harmonizing and being balanced, and one has to be very reflective on how to do that. It's like one of the when we reflect on the quality and the qualities of the Buddha, that in our chanting, one of the qualities, Vijacārana Sampanno, the impeccable in conduct and understanding. So that there's there's this sense of the Sampanno is sort of like complete or replete, full, so to be replete with knowledge, wisdom, understanding, but also to be acting in appropriate ways, in skillful ways, in ways that are beneficial for oneself, beneficial for others. And that's always the Buddha never really separates out like that sense. It's always in the same breath or the same turn of phrase, and that bringing benefit for oneself and for others. It's not separate. So that having that wisdom, discernment to be reflecting, investigating on what actually does bring about a benefit. What is it that does bring true benefit? This aspect of wisdom is not just say like an intellectual knowledge. It's actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. When the Buddha defines wisdom, there's many different ways that he defines wisdom, but it tends to be pretty straightforward in the sense of the understanding the arising and ceasing of phenomena. And so that when things are arising and ceasing, they are conditioning each other. In that process of coming into being and passing away, there is there is this conditioning that's taking place. That is how things arise and cease. They're not independent phenomena. They are interdependent. They are dependent on each other. So that these conditioning and causal processes are affecting each other all the time. So wisdom is understanding that conditioned nature and not getting trapped or reading too much into it or not reading enough into it. It's like the classic definition of the insight that is the say the entering of the stream of Dhamma, the first awakening experience of a stream enterer, as to see whatever is of the nature to arise, that is of the nature to cease. And you think, that's not so difficult. Of course, we tend to miss the implications of that, or we get swept up in the assumptions around it. But that fundamental insight is something really important to remember in order to, because we tend to look for something quite exalted. I mean, if it's going to be for enlightenment and awakening, it must be exalted. But it's the insight into the true nature of things is what changes the mind. It changes the heart, and that wisdom is being able to discern or see clearly this fundamental arising and ceasing and conditioning. Another aspect, of course, that the Buddha emphasizes as a hallmark of wisdom is just seeing the Four Noble Truths, seeing dukkha, seeing arising of dukkha, seeing cessation of dukkha, seeing path leading to cessation of dukkha. This is the essence of wisdom. Another angle of seeing what the essence of wisdom is. So that one is, because so often how we see things is not as, this is dukkha, or this is dukkha arising, or the unsatisfactoriness arising, unsatisfactoriness ceasing. What we tend to relate to, the habit is really, this is me, this is mine, this is what I am. That whole program of self. And the insight into the Four Noble Truths is an opportunity for stepping out of the whole self program. That sense of the identification of me and mine, and that I am. It's a quality of being, becoming. It's incredibly sticky. But it's through that seeing of impermanence that we keep recognizing, anything that keeps changing, keeps arising and ceasing, keeps coming into being and disappearing, that's impossible or inappropriate to be taking and investing in as this is me or this is mine. And in particular, of course, the body and mind. And that's another aspect of what again, when the Buddha defines wisdom, it's another way that he defines wisdom is just seeing the coming into being and the ceasing of body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, 5 aggregates, 5 khandhas. So that being able to recognize those, that is 5 khandhas. We all have the 5 khandhas. We all rely, if we have a life force, we have these 5 khandhas. But rather than that identification that we hold on to or invest in, we're seeing it as these are conditions that are arising and ceasing. And then you start to investigate, well, how did that come into being? How's that work? Is that really taking an interest in that process? So one is understanding it more clearly, but not getting hooked by with the program of identify. It's like in the scriptural language, the Pali language, the Buddha is ahankara mamankara mananusaya. So that the I-making, the mind-making, the underlying tendency to conceit. This is what proliferates the mind. This is what moves the mind. This is what creates. So it's that. It's not that there's an underlying essence. We have to make it. It's the I-making. We do it. We create the sense of I. We create the sense of mind. And we have these underlying tendencies to comparing ourselves in terms of because when the Buddha says conceit, the underlying tendencies to conceit, the way the Buddha defines conceit is different than the English language. Basically, any position of inferior, equal, superior. That because we're assuming an essence, assuming an identity, and it'll be unsatisfying. It'll hurt. So that sense of, that's an aspect of wisdom, but it's also an aspect of compassion. To really see that identification with I and me and mine as a fundamental way that we create suffering for ourselves. And of course, once we're suffering for ourselves, we are quite willing to spread it around and share it. So that's problematic. So being able to see that process more clearly, and so that this aspect of attuning to suffering, attuning to that discontent and dissatisfaction, with an interest in understanding the process, so that we can release, relinquish, step back from. There's a story of Ajahn Chah where he was um, like a fortune teller, palmist, somebody who reads palms, kind of like a fortune teller, and he begged Ajahn Chah if he could read his palms, because he was very well known, and he was incredibly curious to see what somebody who was looked up to so much and considered such an accomplished practitioner. And so Ajahn Chah sort of, okay, well, he tried to put him off at first, but finally he said, okay, yeah, well. And then the fortune teller's looking at Ajahn Chah. He's looking, and he's really confused and looking at him. He said, by all the signs in your hand, you have a lot of anger. And Ajahn Chah, yeah, I know that, but but I don't take it. And so in the sense that it's so simple in Thai. Me that my ao. So it's sort of I have it, but I don't accept it, or don't take it, or don't. I don't. It's I don't receive it. So there's another sense of wisdom. Yeah, okay, so it's a tendency there. Why would I do that? It's painful. Why would I get caught up in that? That's suffering. So it says again the sense of wisdom, compassion, purity, because it's I think somebody like Ajahn Chah, I think one of the ways that he was so skillful in teaching was because he was, he had his own struggles in his practice, but he was also he was very open with how he dealt with the different difficulties, and sometimes reading biographies of enlightened masters, and they're it's like they're born with this kind of almost these fragrance of the celestial beings around them, and then there's everything is all these devas around them, and then they're just pure from the time. But how do we relate to that? What relevance does that have for me? I'm sure for most people, but I think for somebody like, if it's too, again, idealized or separate, and the Buddha himself never, he really, there are these, there is this greed, hatred, delusion. There is non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, which one can manifest. One can choose. One can see, this is suffering, and this is not suffering. Go for the non-suffering bit. Don't keep repeating the suffering bit. And it's a very, very practical, but I think it's also very real. There's the tendency, again, that sense of idealizing and creating a concept of what we think we should be or what we have to be. There's a phrase in the Pali that comes up many, many times. Yena yena hi manyati tatotang hoti anyata. For however one conceives it, it will always be otherwise. And it's so important to recognize that as soon as we conceive of something, we create something, we idealize something, we reify something, it's always going to be something other than that. It's by its very nature, because it is a condition, and it's going to be unstable. It depends how long, but it's never going to be completely stable. It's always going to change into something else. And that's where this cultivation of wisdom, compassion, purity is so important, because this is not setting up wisdom, compassion, purity as solid entities that you have to achieve and get. These are qualities that we have to integrate into our practice, into our living, into our being, and being able to have them as guideposts to remind us, what's helpful, what's beneficial, what is leading to an increase of well-being for myself and for others, what is leading to a decrease of suffering for myself and for others. And that's the Buddha is always pointing to experience, an experiential level, as opposed to an idealized level. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Buddha's teachings are still so relevant for us today. I mean, circumstances are different than India 2,500 years ago, but on a certain level, I don't think human beings have changed all that much, all that radically. I don't think greed, hatred, delusion is all that different 2,500 years ago than it is now. I mean, it has different manifestations, has different ways of playing itself out, but fundamentally it's the same. So we have these tools, we have this opportunity to draw on the Buddha's teachings and to put them into practice, and that and I think this sense of recognizing how these conditioning processes, causes and conditions, how they play themselves out, and again, not the teachings are there, pointing to things as tools to rely on, as opposed to, say, teachings which we memorize and then set in stone. It's like because even they say like conditioning process and the then you go, well, what did the Buddha teach? Well, he taught dependent origination, and then it's because of ignorance, and there's a rising of mental formations arising of consciousness, and it goes through the whole 12 links of dependent origination, and you try to fit it into that model, and you get a headache. It's not that that's not true or that it's not helpful, but it's how we relate to it. And it's like, again, Ajahn Chah giving a very, somebody was asking him about dependent origination, and the person themselves was a scholar and was quite knowledgeable and knew the teachings. And Ajahn Chah said, well, you have to look at it in a different way. He said, it's like, dependent origination is more like, as if you're up in a tree and you fall down from that tree, you don't have to count the branches as you're going down. You just have to know when you hit the bottom, it's going to hurt. So it's that, okay, you go through 12 links of dependent origination, it ends up in suffering. So that you start seeing how those work, how they manifest. And of course, if you look at the teachings throughout the suttas, and of course this is the gathering over these 3 days is a Tripitaka recitation, and it's really wonderful and important that we recollect these teachings and to bring them to mind. But it's also reminding ourselves of how do we use them? How do we apply them? And so that within like all the different teachings scattered throughout the three baskets and particularly the suttas, then that principle of conditioned arising comes up over and over and over again, because it's the fundamental way that the Buddha approaches how we investigate our cultivation and investigate our experience, both in terms of the arising and ceasing of what is unsatisfactory, and because you don't have to go through the whole 12 links of dependent origin. Whatever entry point there is that is a condition for the arising of that ends up in discontent and dissatisfaction, there's that causal principle there. Similarly, when we reflect on the principles of how the cultivation of virtue, cultivation of our meditation, cultivation of wisdom and discernment, the cultivation of the wholesome qualities that are bharami, these spiritual qualities. Those are causally conditioned. We put the causes in, and they manifest. So learning how to nurture those qualities that support our development of qualities of heart, qualities of mind that are bright, that are free from kind of that which clouds and stains, so that this wisdom, compassion, purity. These are qualities that balance each other, and as we cultivate, those qualities become more and more it just become our default option. It's not because it's forced. It's not because it's mandated in. It's not because it becomes increasingly clear to the heart that quality of awareness, that quality of care and attention, the quality of just looking underneath things, being willing to look and see, well, is there anything else going on? So one's discerning clearly. because we know just the longer you live with your mind, you see that we do delude ourselves. We do get caught, and then how's that happen? How's that work? And so there's that interest. So I think that sense of lifting up the different ways that stimulate interest and motivation, encouraging ourselves. And of course that's a real act of compassion, to encourage ourselves to investigate more deeply, to be attuned to suffering, attuned to that sense of discontent and dissatisfaction that we all experience, and being able to hold it in a way that is not, it's there, but we're not identifying deeply with it. And there's a humility there that we mean not to take ourselves so seriously, because sometimes there is a almost what would I be if I weren't suffering? It's sort of, who would I be? I mean, good grief. So there is a real humility in being willing to relinquish that identity and identifying, and of course that I think that compassion is an expression of humility. Wisdom is an expression of humility. Purity is an expression of humility. And there's an opportunity to, just putting down, releasing a burden that has been, that we carry with us, and so as we continue to practice, continue to cultivate this path, these are qualities to be, they're touchstones to keep coming back to, and it's it is fundamental to. You think, well, okay, it's just recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, and that chant that is it's ubiquitous throughout the whole Buddhist world, that Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa, and in all of the traditions, a recollection of the Buddha. But then he's again reminding ourselves, well, what is that pointing to? And it's just those qualities that they're relevant to our cultivation, relevant to our development, and they're the tools that allow us to experience the fruits of practice. That's how we enter into a refuge. We think of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha as refuge. We think of the Buddha as, of course, is kind of the ultimate refuge, but that we are able to enter into this refuge of the Triple Gem, and entering into refuge that the Buddha has given us, and these are the tools that support that. So just as we again this gathering is coming together, doing recitation of the Tipitaka, Sangha is together, and to recollecting these fundamental refuges, and yet to not get too swept up in the conceptualizing and idealizing, but bring it back into, what is it that gives us the opportunity to be free from suffering. To offer that for reflection this evening. And can open it up for a period of questions.
This is an opportunity to ask questions, and there's a microphone over there, and you're welcome to come up here too.
Thank you, Venerable. So I have two questions, if I may. The first has to do with compassion and the four Brahma Viharas. So compassion is one of the four Brahma Viharas, and I'm wondering, why is it singled out? Why is it wisdom and compassion rather than wisdom and joy or wisdom and equanimity?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I mean, I can speculate or proliferate, but I don't. It's probably more to do with Buddhist history than with. And I think, again, just as a conjecture, the element of and I touched on it a bit, in the sense of compassion being a quality that helps the mind, the heart, to go beyond its tendency to idealize or to see the suffering in that objectification, and that's something that is fundamental to our suffering, is this objective, a subject object, and so that with the opportunity to come back to a non-dual, as I'm a bit hesitant to use that term because it then conjures up something solid as well, like a solid non-dual. It's the way the mind works. So that, but there is this, that compassion is something that we can engage in, and engages the heart, that helps us to see the limitation of our either the externalizing or the internalizing, the me and the other, the self and other, the me and the world.
Okay, thank you. So my second question is, I'm just taking advantage of the opportunity. It's something I've been thinking about. I've been reading the Kalama Sutta, and at the beginning of that sutta, the Kalamas come to the Buddha and they say, we're confused because we hear so many different stories, so many different teachings. And the Buddha says, you're right to be confused. And so my question is there a relationship, I'm sure the words are different, but is there a relationship between that confusion and delusion, in the sense of greed, hatred, and delusion?
Well, I mean, I think in the case of, I mean, delusion these are very fundamental, like greed, hate, delusion. These are really fundamental roots. Like in the Pali, that's called mula kilesa. These are root defilements. And so one who's gone beyond delusion would be seeing things clearly. And for in that particular sutta, I mean, they are confused because, I mean, they're getting conflicting teachings. So they're being fed delusion. And when they themselves are not free from delusion, it's a wonderful cycle there. So it's, but they are experiencing, as the Buddha said, it's worthy of confusion.
Okay, thank you.
The idea just came to mind that related to what you were saying before, Ajahn, about suffering and the end of suffering, that the nature of compassion is the wish to end suffering, and wisdom provides the means, perhaps. But I wonder if you might say something about how can we see things clearly? What's most useful to see things as they actually are? And we've heard that Luang Por Chah taught about puru. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but like being the knowing, or different people have translated it in different ways. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a very common term in the Thai language, and is certainly not restricted to Ajahn Chah. Very common in the Thai forest tradition. This sense of being the one who knows, and it comes from the definition. When they define or translate the word Buddha, it's one who knows, one who's awakened, one who's radiant. So those are the fundamental qualities of the Buddha. And of course those are qualities we want to be internalizing. And that sense of, but of course the fundamental quality is the quality of knowing. But it's not so much knowing in terms of getting a piece of knowledge or inheriting some more information, but it's more the fundamental ability of the mind to know and to know itself, and in particular to know Dhamma, to know things in their true nature. It's like there's a very beautiful way that, Ajahn Mun, in his Ballad of Liberation from the Khandhas, there's an illustration of that knowing, and it was sort of like something like the mind knows the Dhamma as the Dhamma, the Khandhas as the Khandhas, then dwells unentangled, and that's the end of the matter. Something like that. I mean, this is very loose paraphrasing, but it's similar to that. But but that sense of there's this fundamental quality that we have of awareness, of knowing, which we have to, we have to pay attention to, we have to nurture, we have to not let it get entangled. But that's just seeing truth as truth, seeing the khandhas, the body and mind. Okay, this is just body and mind, and to not let it get entangled. So that is a, and it's something that is actually that's not. I mean, it's kind of like a hallmark of the Thai forest tradition. Just returning to this puru, this one who knows. Tibetan tradition, similar. The Dzogchen masters tend to come back to that fundamental knowing. It's like there's a great quote by Patro Rinpoche. He's like the Ajahn Mun of Tibet. Was it? Don't ruminate about the past. Don't anticipate the future. Don't cogitate about the present, not tampering with it. Leave mind just as is, aware, relaxed. Beyond this, there's not a damn thing. So, I really like that.
Would you say then, Ajahn, that what people normally call their mind is not actually mind, it's just like kilesas or contents, but that the mind itself is something else?
Well, that itself is a concept.
Huh.
And it's important. It says, "Yena yena himanyati tato tang hoti anyata." For however one conceives it, it will always be other than that. It's what we do to ourselves. So, and it's just like it's like Ajahn Chah saying, "There's only two things to do: know and let go." And so whatever, there's that knowing, and then there's a releasing, and then there's that knowing again, and there's that releasing. And you can't fix it. I mean, in the sense of fix it as a solid thing. You can't make it into a something. So but it's not a nothing. And so it's just this, but it's learning, a lot of it's around trust and faith. So much of, I felt like with say wisdom, compassion, purity, another element that we tend not to talk about is faith or devotion. And I think it's really, in most traditional cultures, I mean, that's just the kind of the heartbeat of it, the kind of the ground that it all grows up from, and sometimes for us as Westerners, I mean, given our cultural background and what, then we tend to have a bit of a suspicious relationship to faith or devotion, but. It plays I think it plays a huge role in that, like learning how to, one is to trust ourselves, and then trusting the process of the Dhamma, and then trusting in the knowledge that does arise.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you. There have been a lot of great talks today, and following up on the previous question, just seeing if I kind of want to pin it down a little more. I love and there was the critique today, the talk about mindfulness, which was great. Mm-hmm. So you have this word mindfulness and the problem of taking it out of context or different traditions. I think I've heard you talk before about the establishments rather than foundations of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. I like the way of talking about it, of establishing, the four establishments are establishing oneself in mindfulness. So my question is, as lay people especially, and using the four foundations of mindfulness as the framework here, is the practice and our goal to be mindful every minute of the day? And within that would be, and how would that relate to times when we're, say, thinking or reflecting, or are we, and then not being mindful, or what? That's the question.
Well, I think one of the things is, thinking and reflecting are aspects of being mindful of our thoughts and feelings. Because it's so, being mindful of our actions are a helpful tool, but it is a tool. It's a mirror to be able to see more clearly what's our mind doing, what's the mood, what's the feeling, and allowing that quality of mindfulness. Because mindfulness in general, needs an object. It's not just some free-floating mindfulness. It is a tool, and then also, it's very rare for the Buddha to talk about mindfulness without having qualifiers, particularly like clear comprehension or alertness is an aspect that is inseparable from mindfulness. So then what you're doing, mindfulness is then with the sampajanya, the clear comprehension, alertness, then it's understanding context. And in terms of the situation that one is in, and then one's own response and feeling towards that, moment to moment. So that is a part of the cultivation. And
the clear comprehension, you would call that an aspect of mindfulness or quality of mindfulness?
Yeah, it'd be a quality of mindfulness. It's inseparable from mindfulness. As I was saying, it's almost never that the Buddha just talks about, say, sati as something that is free-floating or freestanding or indivisible, sort of. It has this qualifier of at least clear comprehension, and then oftentimes in more formal aspects of the defining or illustrating of mindfulness, then the Buddha also includes the aspect of effort. as well as because it says atapi sampajano satima vinaya loke apichato manasa. So these are qualities that are round out the sense of mindfulness. So you've got effort. It's not without effort. Mindfulness is from looking at it from Buddhist psychology, it's a sankhara. It's a mental formation. And the characteristic of a mental formation is that it has cetana. It's a volition. It's a volitionally produced condition. So effort, the way the Buddha always defines effort is effort in terms of the arising of what is skillful and the ceasing of what is the unskillful. So that was putting our effort toward that.
So
and then say mindfulness in the sense of over the mind. There's a presence. There's a certain clarity of mind that is there. And then sampajanya, the clear comprehension, the alertness, the contextual reading of the situation and the internal quality. And then the last one is the part of mindfulness is also to step back from the tendency to liking and disliking. So that's our wanting and not wanting. Or that delight and grief.
So the effort being like the cultivation and the letting go as kind of part of mindfulness.
Oh, it's part of mindfulness, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite a package.
Yeah.
When I listen to your answer, it just comes to my mind about the mindfulness when it maturity and it's very deep. It absent of any concept, any preoccupied idea, so it becomes emptiness, and that is the very end of suffering. So, how you explain about from the mindfulness to emptiness?
Well, I mean that's the function of. It depends how you talk about it or how you present it. But say today, we'll say that okay, that's a manifestation of wisdom, compassion, purity. So those are these. You illustrate it in different ways because you can't separate the Dhamma of the Buddhas. It's like this has got little threads dangling here, and if I just take one of them, but I start pulling on it, this whole table starts to go. It's all tied together. So mindfulness is going to be tied to even formally, then the Buddha never talks about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a part of the Eightfold Path. Or then he starts the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And then it expands out. So these are points of reference for investigation to see how they connect to everything else. And in the end, because they connect and they have the possibility of manifesting in complete freedom. Complete freedom is necessarily going to be, say, empty. and particularly empty of self. I mean, that's it's, emptiness is not like a metaphysical entity, but it's a description of the releasing, relinquishing of the self delusion. Okay.
Thank you, Phante. In practice, I can see that when the mindfulness deepening and become maturity, and it attracts any conceptualization and idea. So when it becomes emptiness, it becomes your natural response to whatever happened there, and just your true compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So this is kind of a practical question. So say someone has manifested like emotional pain in their body, and they want to alleviate it, which is kind of like they want to push it away or stay with it. I guess what's the skillful thing to do with that?
Well, I think with recognizing pain, I mean the whether it's physical or whether it's emotional, the underlying or immediate desire or wish is to push it away, and so to be able to be patient enough and to be and recognize that, because oftentimes if we can rationalize it as if I just pushed it away or I didn't have to feel this, then that would be an act of compassion for myself. And sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes you can't just, you have to learn how to balance, because sometimes, say like pain is a motivation. Sometimes pain is overwhelming, and you need to learn how to do it in small doses, and you have to learn how to hold it with kindness and compassion, and so that you can't just be bashing away at pain. Again, whether it's physical or emotional, one has to. That's where wisdom is important, because sometimes the wisdom to lift up something that is inspiring or encouraging, or allows one to say alleviate the feeling without trying to annihilate or dismiss, but it's you know that, okay, I need to get back to this sometime, but for now it's too much. So that's wisdom, because we can't just because it looks good on paper, oh, the end of suffering is like this. That isn't how our heart will respond to it. And so we have to learn how to modulate our practice. So often, people burn out in practice because they're doing all the right things by the books, by paper, but they're not tuning in to their own experience. It's theorizing or idealizing, conceptualizing. So we have to come back to our experience and say, okay, what can what can I deal with right now? What is actually going to help right now? What is going to be beneficial? And so that is that there's a, and sometimes you have to. You said, like, I remember just so often going to, like all of us as students of Ajahn Chah, going to him and asking for advice, wanting to get the right handle on the practice, right? Wanting to, and it was really frustrating because so often he said, you just have to be patient. And it was, I don't want to be patient. I want to get this over with. But that just because you want it like that, that isn't how it works.
And also, so like if you're experiencing compassion and it hurts, like is that? What about that? When there's pain, is compassion supposed to be without that kind of pain, of empathy, or?
Well, the reality is again, you have to separate out what it says in the books, because and yes, say as a divine abiding, then one of the stains of or obstacles of compassion is being overwhelmed by pity, suffering, and so being overwhelmed by suffering. But as the reality is that it's the willingness to lift up that experience of suffering and feeling with it, and then looking for a skillful, true way of holding it and working with it. And that takes time. And so that, there's an element of suffering or pain, and being willing to turn one's attention to what is the compassionate response. But we don't learn if we don't feel. So.
Thank you. I'm reminded of where we are actually in this temple hall, and the plaques on the wall are the 8,000 line Prajna Paramita, and they are in Tibetan and in Lansa, which is a sacred symbol. And so for me, we see these scriptures or these letters that actually point to wisdom. One time on Vulture's Peak, they were announced. And so I think just coming back home to our refuge, to our Dharma Vihara, this morning we heard that word, and taking that back into our own experience and making that really a relevant place of direct experience, so that these teachings that point to something that the Buddha understood through his awakening are pointers, but we have to point back to our own home. And I think it's really wonderful to hear a guiding elder who's using life, our life journey, as the practical material, the nourishing material for us to be entering into this path. And it has to be relevant to ourselves, that personal narrative, whatever that journey is. So we've had a very full day, and thank you all for being with us and for sharing in Dhamma together. And just as a little symbol to Ajahn Pasanno, we have a katak, which is for auspiciousness and long life and more Dharma talks, more and more, wherever they may be. One place I would like to start with is just a little seed, is maybe Bodh Gaya. So I'm going to offer you a photo that I took several years ago under the Bodhi tree. Not actually, I didn't take myself, but it means a lot to me. It was sitting in my office, and I thought, this is just from me to you to say thank you. It's actually from all of us. Also offer you some quotes of my father.
One more. What's the proper way to receive a katha? So 50 years of rich life.
Thank you.
Can I offer a blessing? Samaroga vinimundo sambasanda bhavachindo sambhave ramade gano nibundo jatawa bhavasapitiyo vivajandu samarogo vinasandumate Bhavadvandarayo Sukhindika Yungho Bhavahamiwa Dhanasili Sanichangota Vajayino Jataro Dhamma Vandhandeya, ยุวันโนสุขังภาลัง Amen.
อาเมน
Amen.
อาเมน Thank you.
ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you. ขอ Thank you.